Hey everyone, how's it going today? Can you hear me okay? Having some issues setting stuff up quickly, so I'm actually working on getting the stream working a different way with equipment. So at the moment, I'm just trying to get things set up, so that's why it might seem somewhat disorganized, but hopefully I'll have that sorted out tonight. So somebody asked about servos yesterday, so I thought I'd show you first what it looks like on the ramps, and then we'll go from there. So on the ramps, as you can see, there's a rail right here for servos. That rail is actually used for setting up the choice of servos that you want to work with. So I'm just gonna set this in a manner that I can work with it here. Just figure out a good way to center this. And the whole problem with the servo is you can do 4 on this board, but you can only do 1 on the other board. So I'm going to show you first how to figure out what's going on here. You're going to need a jumper on the ramps if you're using one. And the jumper basically allows you to power the rail. And I need to figure out what that is because it's been a while. So one of the things I can do is actually look at the board, and I can see that VCC and 5 volts on the board need to be jumped. So I'm going to take a jumper and I'm going to jump those two together. That way I can provide power to it via the USB port right over here. So we're going to start with 1 servo and see what happens, but we need to look up what the actual design is. But as you've seen before, brown wire is ground, red wire is voltage, and then orange wire is signal. So we're going to have to go over to a web browser in a second. So I'm going to bring that up in just a second. Here we go. I just have to make sure that it's visible to you. Let's see if I can see it first. Yep. So I'm going to go over there. And I'm going to look for the ramps, pinouts. And this should bring up a diagram of what the pinouts look like. So as you can see, if we look at this closely, let me bring it so you can see everything. Give me a second here to go to the website. See if I can find a way to bring it up so you can see everything. There we go. So on this board, you can see where you have servo 1 and servo 2. So D11 is probably our servo 1. We're going to start with that, and that's the signal pin being D11. Then you have ground on the other side. So if this is oriented correctly, think about this for a second because of where I am. So the power supply is going to be on this side. So in order to set this up, we have to know that D11 is on the inside of the rail. Doesn't make sense to me, so I have to look at this closely. Yes, that is true. So D11 should right theory here. I'll move this over a little bit so we can plug in some power. So let me bring a cable over to it. And the board is now powered. So what I need to do is actually go to VS Code. And this is also going to take me a second to set up because I have to set up the fresh firmware here. And I'll check on the chat in 2 seconds. I just have to first do this extraction. So basically I have the most recent download that I know of. There might be a new one, but I haven't seen it as of yet. But there should be one coming out eventually. So let me check on the chat here, see what's going on. You guys seem a little quiet today. Hopefully I'm streaming okay. Let me check on that. I may have to mute the chat for a second on my side just so I can see. I may have to mute the chat. Sorry about that. Okay. So can you guys hear me okay? I'm not seeing a lot of people. Hang on a second. Okay, see what we got here. Currently there's a delay on my side, so I don't see everything that's going on. But I'll walk you through this. So I'm gonna go into VS Code so you can see what I'm doing. Just wait for it to appear here. There we go. So inside VS Code, to set this up, you're gonna have to go over to here, open a folder, and you might not see this part, but I'm going to Downloads, the Marlin folder. So that's Marlin 2.0, then the second Marlin folder, then I'm selecting the folder. When this comes up, we're in the default configuration for ramps. So I'm going to search on ramps, or excuse me, motherboard. And you can see that we have the default configuration and it's set to 0. So we're going to search on servos, actually num servos. And we're going to set it to not 3, but 1. Because currently we're only using 1. And this is just a delay. And then there's a G code we're going to have to look up. I think it's M280, but I can't remember. So after we have that set, what we need to do is check our platform IO.ini environment. And as you can see, it says Mega 2560. And that's our default chipset. So I'm going to do a clean. And then I'm going to do a build and a upload. And the reason that we're doing this is to figure out if first the servo works. I don't know what position the servo's in right now, so this is going to be interesting. But we'll go over to the browser for the moment. Let me just check on the chat here. And what we're going to do is we're going to be inside the browser and we're going to look for G codes. Hang on, I got to transition over. So we're going to go over here and we're going to do Marlin firmware. We're going to go to the home and we're going to first check under help to see if we can find G codes. We'll go to all documents. Then we'll do a search on servo and it's M280. So as you can see, it says position being indexed, so it's, I believe, 0 would be our index in this case. So we'll check that in Pronterface in just a second. So as soon as the firmware loads, we'll be good there. So I'll open up Pronterface while that's going on. And let's see what the state of the actual firmware is for loading. So it looks like it just completed. So we're good there. So what we're going to do is go into Pronterface next, but let's see if I can see it before you can see it. There we go. So inside Pronterface, we may have to figure out what our COM port is. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Device Manager. So I'll bring up Device Manager and show you what's going on. Let me just bring this where you can see it. So inside Device Manager, we're going to go to Ports, and we're looking for the Mega 2560, which is COM port 21. So we're going to go back to Pronterface, and we're going to change COM port 1 to 21, and then connect. So it looks like we're good there. So let's try doing M280 key 0 because it's the first one. And then S is going to be the angle, so we'll do 90 and we'll see what happens. So it looks like nothing happened. Now it could be that it's in the 90 position. Let's try negative 90 and nothing. So I've got to troubleshoot this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect, and I'm going to move this to the other side in case it's on a different pin that I'm actually reading. Try this again. And then I'll reconnect and see if anything happens. So nothing. So there could be something electrically wrong with my board. So what we can do is bring out the multimeter to check it. So I'm going to bring that out and see if you can see what I'm doing here. Because what we're looking for is the actual power that's occurring. So we're going to check millivolts. And let's see if we can see what's going on with these two pins. But I don't want to do it this way because I might cook something. So I'm going to see if I can find a jumper to do this correctly. There's one. Need one more. It's going to take a second because I've got them all sorted around. So we just want to see if we get voltage and ground. So I'm going to hook one of these to voltage and another one to ground. See if they're working. So yellow is going to be ground in this case, and orange is going to be voltage. So I'm going to take this and place it on voltage, this and place it on ground. See what I get for a reading. So it looks like I'm not getting a reading. It might be that I've got a bad connection, but it says 5 volts. So I'm just on the wrong setting. So we're good there. So the question is signal pin. We've got to figure out why the signal pin's not working. So we're going to have to go over to VS Code. And inside VS Code, I'm going to go and I'm going to see if I can find the source pins. And then I'm going to look for our chipset, which is the Mega probably. And then we're going to look for the ramps if it's in here. I could be wrong. So, whoops, there it is, ramps. So, under the ramps, we're looking for ramps 1.4. Here's 1.3, which is very similar. And I don't see it right away, which is super odd. So the way that we can find this quickly, because this might not be in the category that we're looking for, which some of these actually have the same pins. I know that the MKS does, but let's go for ramps right here. So we're going to look for servo. And what it says for the 0 pin is that it's 11. So if it's 11, that means that it's at the top. So we're going to move this back where it's the top. And we're going to check our command, because that's probably the issue. But let's see if anybody in the chat knows. Sound is good, thanks. Let's see, I have a question. Before you calibrate the drivers, we have to update the firmware first. So it depends upon what you mean by calibrate. There's different types of calibration. The easiest one is through the firmware. So you would load a default version of the firmware. You would then measure the distance that it moves. And then you probably, normally I try and move it 100 millimeters. Then you're going to do a calculation where you divide actual by the amount that it moved and multiply by 100, and that's your new value. I think that's the formula, or I might have it reversed. I have to actually do it in practice. And then you'd replace that variable inside your firmware, and I'll show you that real quick. So if we were to go over to configuration.h, and you search on the A4988, just below it, this is the value that you're going to take. So start with your default of 80, and then do your calculation based on that, with 100 being your movement. So you divide 80 by whatever your movement is, multiply by 100, and that's your new value. Then you'd reload the firmware to see if it does move that actual distance. And then later on, you'd probably print a calibration cube when you've got all 3 axi the way you want them. Hope that answers your question. So let's go back over and see if we can figure out what's going on now with why this isn't working. And I think it's G-codes, because I know it's powered. I could test the actual signal pin, but in this case, I don't think that's required. So we're just going to go over and browse at the browser and see what's going on here. Maybe there's an example of how to move it, or it might be that it's P1. So I'm going to go back into here. 2 seconds, I just want to try something real quick, because they may have changed the enumeration, or my servo doesn't work, which is another possibility. But let's see what we've got here. So servo index is their position. So number of servos is going to be 1. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm actually doing wrong. So let's see if we can find an example of M280 Marlin. So this is the reprap.org, and let's see what they say for 80. So I'm not seeing much in the way of an answer, unless I burned out my servo. So let's go back to Pronterface and try this again. M280 E0. Let's try 0. Nothing. So maybe I need to try a different servo because it might be broken. But then I got an error here. Servo 9 out of range. Error servo 9 out of range. Oh. Would make a lot of sense. I put 9 there. So no movement. No movement. That's awesome. So I might not have a backup servo on hand that I can see if I have one in my box here. Well, I do have a second servo. Let's give it a try. One actually might be better. I'm gonna pop this out. Same thing for the wiring. This time it's a little bit darker. I have this plugged in backward. Shouldn't damage it. There we go. Something happened. So let me see if you can see that servo. Looks like you can. So let's try a command on it. So turns out I had bad servo. Awesome. So let's try 90. So that works. Let's try negative 90. That works. So now we're going to try it on the other board just to see if it works. And then we're going to try and figure out how to add an additional servo. I don't know if this is possible, but we're going to try it out anyways. So I'm going to go back over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, I'm going to first change the configuration. So what I mean by that is I'm going to change it to a known configuration for the board we're working with. And in this case, the board is going to be a RAMPS 1.4, I believe. Yes. So in order to do that, we have to search on motherboard. We need to change this configuration, so we need to find out what it is. So we'll go to core boards.h. In boards.h, we'll search on SKR. We'll copy the configuration because I believe it's not the turbo, but let me flip it over and check. Yeah, it is a turbo. So actually we can't use that one. So we have to go to this one down here and copy it. Then we're going to go back over to our board and we're going to change the motherboard to this type. Now the chipset I already have memorized, so we'll just go over here and it's LPC 1769. And then we'll unplug. I'll show you that real quick. So I'm going to unplug the USB over here, plug it into here. And then we'll hook up the servo in just a second. But let's see if the firmware loads. So we're going to have to do a clean. Then we can do an upload. I'll check on the chat now. The servo wasn't working, the blue one. Turns out I think it burned out, but it turns out I had a second one on hand that I could use it for. Yeah, someone asked how to do a servo last night, and they want to do it not on the servo port. So first we're trying it on the servo port to make sure it's working, then we'll go from there. So there are a lot of things you can use servos for. You can use them for sleds, so you can angle down your BL Touch. Or there might be other applications that you have in mind that you're using it for the Marlin. There's 4 specified on the ramps. That's one of the reasons I like the board. But since I haven't used it in a while, I wanted to see if we could set it up for the other board based off of what the ramps tells us. So I'm going to show you how to do that, hopefully. This might not turn out well, but we'll find out. So I'm going to show you first that the firmware was successful. And I'll show you how I'm going to load it. So I'm going to go over to my desktop. Hopefully the camera won't blink out because I think we're almost a half an hour in. It just did. Hang on a second. And so we're going to de-energize this. And we're going to re-energize it because we know the firmware is on there. Give it a second to beep. It's loaded, so I'm going to de-energize it again. And we got to check to see where we can connect the servo initially. We're going to go over to the browser. We're going to search on VTT GitHub SKR 1.4 will bring us to where we need to be. So what we're interested in is the hardware and the pins. I'm going to click here. And we want to find the servo port. And this might be kind of funky. I can't remember if they fixed this. So you have your servo ports right here. And I need to figure out how they have them. So it's ground, power, 2 volts. Let's try that. We're going to go over to the workbench for a second. And it was ground power signal. That looks like the right way to hook it up. Let me move this one in. And I'll plug it back in. It looks like it's got power. So we're going to go back over to Pronterface. And because the actual port has changed, we have to find out what it is. So I'm going to show you what that looks like real quick. So now it's COM port 13. So in order to set this up, we have to change Pronterface to COM port 13. And then connect. And hopefully this works if I'm looking at the right COM port. So far it's not connecting, so we'll try disconnecting for a second and seeing if we can get this to work. So for some reason it doesn't want to connect. So now we have to probably close this down. So I'm going to put you on the workbench for a second while I fix this, I hope. Okay, back over to Pronterface as soon as you can see it. There we go. And let's try and connect. So it doesn't want to connect all of a sudden, so there might be something going on. So I'm going to disconnect the USB for a second. I'm then going to take out the connection for servo, reconnect, then try and connect here. So there's something else going on the board. So what it was that I did, you've probably seen me do this once before last week. I'll explain the problem. If you go over to VS Code with me, you'll see why I made a mistake. So inside VS Code, if you go to motherboard and configuration.h, scroll up, you'll see that I forgot to set the port to -1. I'm going to set that to -1, but now I have to go over to my workbench again, and I actually have to load the firmware a different way because it will not, well, it might actually load. So let's give it a try and see if it works. I've actually never done this fix this way, but I'm basically sending the firmware back over to the board. If it does work, we're good. Otherwise, I have to take it out, put it in a converter, and load the firmware manually, then put it back in the board. But it says that it worked, so let's try power cycling and seeing what happens. So I'll bring you over to the desktop so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to disconnect the power, reconnect the power, and we're going to see if it actually comes up. So I can see the drive now, so let's go back over to Pronterface, see if I can see it there. So now it's online. So that -1 instead of 0 was the issue. So I'm going to reconnect the actual servo. Ground is here, I believe. And we'll try this command again. M280 P0 S, we'll say 45, and it works. So now that we know it works, we have to figure out the difference between the two configurations, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if we go back over to VS Code, inside here, when we went to source pins, and then we went down to ramps, and we found it down here someplace. We searched on servos, and the very first servo was 11. This is actually for the ramps 1.3. So the next one is 6, and the next one, excuse me, is 5 and then 4. So that's what's on the pinout diagram. So we're going to need to actually look at this close up and make changes. So what we want to do is I want to pick like something like the max port. So I'll show you what I'm thinking about doing, and then you can try this on your own. So if we go back over to the web browser, you can see that on the board we have power detect, we have E1 detect, and then we have E0 detect. Those are filament sensors. So let's go with the power detect is something that we can work with. So let's see if we can find that real quick. So inside of Marlin, we're going to look for our particular configuration, which is the LPC 1769. And it's going to go here. So let's do a search on servos. So we find nothing. So if you've watched my tutorials before, you know why, because it's going to something else. So it's saying include 1.4. So let's go over to 1.4, which is actually not in this folder, but this folder. So we're gonna go here, and we're gonna see if servo's in here. So let's search on servo. So there's one servo pin right here. So the problem that we have is that the structure of this is different and doesn't have compiler directives for other pins. But let's see if we've got our, our power detect. Let's search on power detect. That's actually pin number, sorry, it's taking me a second to look. It says that it's pin number 1, so P1_0, I think is what we're looking for. So P1_0. And what it does say is that it is Zmax power detect. So now we got to figure out how to deal with this. So we're going to do something interesting. We're just going to compare the two files and be done with it. So I'm going to go over to the desktop for a second and show you what I'm going to plan on doing. Get it up so you can see where it is. Okay. Let me bring you over to it. So inside here we have our Marlin 2.0. Inside Marlin 2.0, we have Marlin again. Then we have source. Then we have pins. And what we're looking for, we're going to create a temp file here for a second. And we're going to go into the ramps and see if we can find that file. So it's ramps. That's old. I know I'm scrolling probably right by it. Interesting. Here's the 1.3. Apparently I'm a little bit blind, so I'm going to go back to VS Code so we can see what's going on. So inside VS Code, we need first, let's go to the LPC 1768. So we're going to go to pins, LPC 1768. We're going to find our board and copy it. Then we're going to go back up to Marlin or source. Trying to find the temp folder. Apparently it might be up here. Anyways, we'll just create it. Oh, there it is. We'll paste it right here. Now we've got to go find the Marlin. I'm going to take us back over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, we need to find that set of pins. So we'll collapse this. We'll look for the ramps folder. And let me scroll down through here and see if I can find it, because I went by it a second ago. So it's ramps. We're going to go back over to the desktop. And we're going to go to pins. And we're going to go to ramps. And then we're going to find ramps. And we're going to copy that again. I go into temp, paste that right there. So let me check on the chat real quick. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people have turbos. That's what about 50% of my questions are on. Yeah, loading it can be a challenge, but once you figure out how to do it, it's easy. So let me show you how to compare these together. I'm going to right click. Let me make sure I'm on the right thing that I'm showing you here. And I'm going to use Fortis SVN to do a diff. And this is going to be a mess. So they're not very similar files. But what we're interested in is the servo pin. So we're similar in logic, but we're doing something different. So we're going to copy some of this over. Unfortunately, we're going to have to copy over some other logic because of the way it's set up, maybe. We might actually, no, we can get away with this. So I'm going to copy this. Remember, it's P2_2. So I'm going to move that over. And I'm going to change this to P2_00. This part right up here, I don't think we need that logic, but what we're going to do is just leave it for now. Hopefully we won't get a bad failure. If we do, we can go back and take it out. But good practice is probably to do these. So maybe we'll do that. So I'm going to say servo 0, and then I'm going to knock out part of this. So it might be easier just to copy this line and paste it right here. And then copy this, paste it right here. And these are, I believe, compiler directives, which means how to compile a certain way. So now that we have that defined, I need to get these spaces out, but that'll actually, they don't exist. So it's servo 0, then it's servo 1. So servo 0, and I'll check my work in a second because I know I'm doing something wrong. So it's if in, so it's only this part. So this is what I do for define. So that looks okay, but define port 0. Okay, so logic looks good. So now we need to find this pin. This is where it gets a little bit boring, and I know I just... Oh, hang on a second. Sorry. Wrong thing. Okay. Can you see it now? Let me check to see if you can see it. Okay. So all I did, I'll undo what I did here real quick, hopefully. Okay. So I did a file compare for a diff between the two. Now I'm going to copy over this section to the other side. And we already have it defined up here. So what we need to do is make sure that that's correct. So we're going to do an if on this. So I'm going to copy this over just in case. And then I'm going to change this to what it was a second ago, which is right here. That's our first servo pin. So I'm going to copy this over. And then I'm going to place it right here. And these are compiler directives in order to work with the compiler. Now, we don't have other pins at the moment, so I'm going to whack these because we don't need them. And we just need this pin for the detection. So I'm going to move this over. Well, actually, I'm going to bring up the browser. It's just going to make it easier. So inside the browser, as you can see now, we have pins that we need to find. And that pin number is for power detect. So for power detect, we have to look through here. And what we see is that it's 1.0, unlike our servo, which is 2.0. So we have to follow the same nomenclature. So I'm going to go back over to the desktop so you can see this. Minimize this out of the way. So we're going to call this P1 underscore 00. And in theory, we've done part of what we need to do. Next, we got to find what it is down here. So just to be safe, we're actually going to change this to P. Hang on, it says min max. That's not right. Power detect. Power detect is the Z max. We need to find that. It's down here. So we're going to completely wipe this out just to see what happens. I've never done this before. Actually, we're gonna leave it. See what happens. So we're gonna save that. And we're gonna save the right side. We're gonna save it as what it is, which is pins. We're gonna replace that. And we're gonna go down here and we're gonna rename this new. Whoop. And you'll see why in a second. I want to copy out the other one. So basically we're gonna go back to the pins. We're gonna go to the LPC 1768. We're gonna copy this one. We just want to keep a copy of the known good one. Then we'll go back here, paste it here. Then we'll copy the new one. We'll go back to pins. We'll paste it right here. We'll delete the other one because we have a copy of that. We'll rename it back to what it is. Okay. So in theory, we've fixed that. Now we have to go back over to Marlin and see if we can get away with using it. So we're going to go back over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, we're going to go over to, hang on a second, let me close all this down so we can see what we're talking about. We're going to go to configuration.h. We're going to do a search on num servo. We're going to change that to 2. And then we're going to compile again and upload to the board. Now, hopefully it won't break, but it looks like it did. So now we got to figure out how to see if we can fix this. So there's a structure issue with the actual file. So the endif, so we've got to fix that. So it says endif without if. So we need to find the poundif and add it in. I'm going to copy this. We're going to go back up to pins, which is in source pins ramps. Whoop, sorry, source pins LPC 1768 and right here. So there's an if without an endif, which is probably right here. So let's try adding it in. Whoop. If. So we're going to cheat and try and copy some of the nomenclature from the other one because this is getting to be a little bit long in the tooth. So we're going to find ramps. And let's see. We're just going to copy the nomenclature for a second. And then we'll call it something else, like itself. So let's go to pins. I'm just going to put it up above. All we're doing is copying the structure. But we're going to ignore this part. And we're just going to call this P2 underscore. Then we'll take out this. And see if we can get away with compiling. This might be kind of weird. So we got another failure. So number of servos, we have to change someplace for preprocessor. Pins exist, servo 0, pins exist. Let's try changing this to 2. Not even sure which file I'm in right now. Select conditional post. That's interesting. Let's try an experiment. Let's go over to... Oh, I know what it is. You'll like this. We go over to configuration.h and we go right here. Because they're different, meaning you have more than one servo, you have to add a second one. Let's try this again. Okay, that doesn't look good. Let's see. Terminated. Clean. Try this again. So it's still not working. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this back to ramps for a second just to see what happens. I know this is going to be kind of weird, but I just want to see if it compiles with 2. So we're going to go over to 4 boards, search on ramps, find our particular board. Which is this one right here. Copy it. We're going to go back to configuration.h. We're going to search on motherboard. I'm going to paste it right here and change the platform io.ini back to what it was. And then we'll try and recompile. I just want to see if the error is still the same. Probably shouldn't have hit upload, so let me disconnect. Yeah. So let's see. That has to do with it being connected possibly, so let's do the checkbox. And let's do a clean and then a checkbox. This is probably not going to go anywhere today. Okay, so at the moment it doesn't look like it's working, so I'm going to close this. And I'm going to do this from scratch and see what's occurring. So I'm going to have to unzip this. I'll check on the chat while that's going on. Hey, Rob, how's it going? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out a very simple problem. Apparently, I've been having issues trying to show how to work around a problem. So I'm unzipping a second version of Marlin so that we can try this. And essentially I want to see if it compiles first in the regular Marlin, and if it doesn't, then there's a bug. Most people don't use force servos. I haven't used them in years. So we're going to see if we can figure that out. Let's see. I'm going to see where I can show you what's going on here. So let me go back to VS Code. Now you can actually see what I'm talking about. Inside VS Code, I'm going to open a folder. You might not be able to see this part. Going to my downloads folder. I'm opening up a second version of Marlin. And inside here, we already have a setup, but what we need to do is we need to go, oh, I know what the other issue might be, the -1. So let's first see if this works. So configuration.h, inside configuration.h, we don't have to set up much except for number of servos. So we're going to search on num_servo. We're going to change or uncomment this. We're going to change this to 2. We're going to add a second one here of 300 milliseconds. And then we're going to do a clean and then build. If this fails, then there's an issue, but I don't think that's the issue, because it will pass. So it looks like that was successful. So the issue is really simple, hopefully. No, actually, that's not simple. Think about it. Let me close this, reopen the other one. I'm going to go to the downloads. I'm going to go to my first Marlin instance, reopen it. I'm going to check to see what my baud rate, whoop, hang on, I got to wait for this to clear. We're good there. And we're good here. We're not good here. So we got to change that. I'm going to go to my source folder for boards. Search on SKR. The turbo. And then go back to configuration.h, paste it. And we're good there. Number of servos. We've got the number of spaced. Let's try doing a clean and a build again. I know there's going to be build issues. So let's hit the Control-Shift button, click on that. And it looks like that might be an issue. Let's try doing another build. And it looks like we might, no. The other issue is simple. Go back to configuration.h, search on motherboard. That's set right, and then we have to go to platformio.ini, change this to the LPC 1769, and then try and rebuild again. So apparently I had a couple of compiler errors. So let's see what's going on here. So fatal error, no such file or directory. So let's go to the first error. AC 1769. So as you can see, it's a little bit harder than normal to do this. So let's try searching config advanced to see if there's actually an option to do this. So there is something for vent servo, but it's set to 1. We might be able to use that, but then I have to undo the changes in the other file. If we're only allowed to use 1 servo. So let's see if there's 5 instances of servo. I see 3 right here. Newer code with USB compatible, but less tested and known. The interface with servos 1 required for. So this might be another way to do it, but I'm not sure what they're talking about. So let's see if there's another thing they're talking about here. So they're talking about pin status. That's where you're throwing a pin high with debug. So this might be a little bit more involved than I thought to show you. Essentially, I'm trying to trick the actual pins file into doing this for us. And I'm pretty close to getting it right. But unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it right in the time frame that we have for this. So maybe we'll do something different. Let's see if there's any questions that I can answer in the chat, because I'm not going too well on this one today. Sorry, I'm a little bit worn out from work, so see what we got. So I'm switching to an older G-Tech A10 to the SKR 1.4 Turbo right now. Any idea how to get the end stop to function like the Mega 2560, or would sensorless be better? Wire flip didn't work. Wire flip for sensors shouldn't work. That's not a good thing to do. With the end stop, you're talking about flipping it in software, I think. Or at least I think that's what you're trying to say. Okay, well, let's see if we can talk about the SKR 1.4 for a second for end stops. So end stops, you gotta be very careful. I'll show you what I'm talking about, and let me get it to desktop. On the desktop, I'm basically cleaning up from my little mess here. So end stops, I've got to grab one. Not knocking everything over. Here's an end stop. So you have 3 wires. You have a green, in this case. Green, which is signal, black, which is ground, red, which is voltage. We look at the diagram for this. Let me pull it up here. Hang on a second. The diagram over here for the board, you can see that there's the X, the Y, and the Z. Over here, you have voltage, ground, signal. You can't flip this cable because voltage and ground, well, you possibly could get away with it, but don't do it because you damage your board. So you have 5 volts, ground, signal. We're going to do this for the export. So I'll show you what I'm doing. So voltage, ground, signal. So voltage is at the top, then ground, then signal. So voltage at the top. I'm going to plug this in like so. You can see what the cabling is. Now I'm going to plug it in, and you'll see a light hopefully come up on this. So if you click it, it'll light up in this case. So what we need to do is actually figure out what the status of this is. Usually when I do status, I go over to Pronterface, so let's go there. So inside Pronterface, may have to reconnect to this. I don't remember what the COM port is. I think I'm gonna have to check my device manager. I'll just look quick. It's COM port 13. So connect. Ground line. So to check the status, it's M119. So they all say triggered. So I'm gonna trip it with my finger and do the command again. Now it says open. The reason that happens where it's backwards is because the logic is backwards. So if you go over to VS Code, let me clean up VS Code here. I'm going to actually close it down and go to the other one in a second. So I'm just going to close this. I'm going to reopen the other VS Code that I had here. Or excuse me, the other Marlin. I'll wake up in a minute. And the other Marlin, as soon as it finishes doing that platform IO stuff, I'm just going to change this. I'm going to disable the end stop for now. I'll search on motherboard. Motherboard is right now set to a ramp, so I'm going to go to source core boards. Find the SKR real quick. Copy it. Back to configuration.h. Paste it. I'm going to change this to -1. And so that's where we were when we first loaded it today. So now we're going to look for invert. And what we're looking for is the end stop stuff. So you have end stops here. So we're on the X minimum. So we're going to change this to true. I'm going to have to change my platform IO folder or file. So it's going to have to be LPC 1769. And do a clean and then an upload. And I'll disconnect from Pronterface while I'm doing this so that I don't mess things up, hopefully. And I'll check on the chat while that's going on. Yeah, the logic for the light, I'm not sure if it's on or off depending upon which type you're using, because it can be on for other ones, but we'll see about that. So the compile, I believe, just completed. It uploaded, so I'm going to bring it over to the board for you guys to watch. Disconnect it. Reconnect it. Go back over to Pronterface. Inside Pronterface, we're going to reconnect to M119. As you can see, it's open now. You trigger it with your finger and do it again, it's triggered. So that's all there is to setting up that type of end stop. There are multiple types of them, because if I were to disconnect this and try a different one, you'd see something different. So let me grab one real quick. So here's another type of end stop. I'm going to de-energize the board for a second. I'll pop this out of the way. Put another one down. This one only has a red and a black wire, so the connection's different on this one. This one, when you connect it, you're going to have to connect to signal and ground. So signal and ground are the second two. They have voltage, ground, signal. So you're going to put it on ground and signal. You're going to plug it back in. You're going to go into Pronterface, disconnect, reconnect. M119. Now it says triggered. So I'll trip it with my finger and do it again. And now it says open. So logic is basically backwards again, so you'd invert it. I'll show you a different end stop again. This will be an optical end stop. Sorry, I have to dig out the equipment while I'm doing this. So here's an optical end stop. I marked the cables. So I have it marked as red, black. That tells me that it's voltage, ground. So voltage, ground, signal. This one I might have to boost up on something so you can see it. Looking for my little thingy that I usually use for it, but I might have to do it with my... So essentially what this is an optical end stop. So I'll reconnect going on. So the optical end stop, you break a field. So I've got to get creative here and give you something to break the field with. So first we'll check the status of it real quick. So connect, M119, enter. It says triggered. Try untriggering it. So I put a piece of paper in and I'll try it again. Now it says open. So those are a couple of different end stops that you can work with. Let's see. When wiring grounds the board out and resets, the board goes out and resets, I mean it power cycles. When wired properly, the LED stays on and does not trigger as far as I know. I think what might be going on is that something was wired incorrectly. Go back and check your pinouts just to make sure. But I can't tell you for sure what's going on with your board from a distance. I can just show you how to wire it the way that I know how. Others might be able to do it better than me, but unfortunately I have to walk through each piece. So I'm trying to figure out what your question is. Is your board not working? When you reverse the logic in the Marlin firmware? Okay, well, I don't know if I'm the best at this, but I like walking people through stuff that's easy with end stops. I tried to do something more complex a second ago, and you saw how well that worked, but it works. That's good. Yeah, wiring is an art. One of the tricks to it is always check your pins and also check your wires to make sure they match. You want to get grounded signal right, or excuse me, you want to get voltage, ground, and signal right. If you don't get them right, you'll have results that you will not like. I'm talking from experience of bad situations. I once wired up, what was it, the second end step that you saw for a printer, not checking my my inputs, and plugged it in and tripped it, and then watched smoke rise from my board. So this is one of the reasons I do these, is so that you don't have the same situation happen. Unfortunately, I think a couple weeks ago people saw it happen. I'm still talking to the manufacturer about it, but they're not being real clear as to what could have occurred. They're telling me that I possibly hooked something up backwards, but they haven't watched the video, so I don't know what's going on. But I've been told I had 2 different ground potentials by somebody else. So I'm working on changing my recording station so I can avoid that in the future. That's why everything's broken down. And I seem somewhat disorganized today because I'm putting together a big frame to put around this so that it can make less mistakes. But does anybody have any more questions? I've been kind of burned out this week, so I'm trying to get some rest. Okay, well, it seems kind of quiet in the chat. For those that don't know, there is a let me move it over where you can see it. A Discord that I keep, that you can come over to and ask me questions or other people questions. It gets somewhat crowded in there at times. That would be here, let me show you what it looks like. And it's also in the description of the video. So let me just move it so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the Discord. Everyone's usually in general chat. There's a lot of questions and answers going on in there. So if you get a chance, stop in there and maybe someone can answer your question for you. If not, I'll also be there once in a while, or I will monitor the chat daily. And for those that have been sending PayPals, I know the list is getting kind of long. I don't want to go into it yet another time because I have to look it up. But there's been significant amount of people sending me PayPal. I'm greatly appreciated. And it's a great way for me to offset some of the costs to bring you these tutorials. And for the Patreons, thank you as well. And everyone, take care, be safe, and I'll catch up with you on Monday. Monday, I might move it to 6 o'clock, depending upon how busy at work I am. So if I'm not on at 5, I'll be on at 6. So everyone take care, and thank you very much once again.